We often picture Roman gladiators as heroes, powerful and brave, who entered the arena with thousands of people cheering for them. They fought, they won, and they became legends. But that was not the real case. For the majority of gladiators, there was no honor, no options available, and no happy ending. Many of them were slaves, prisoners, or poor men trying to survive. They were forced to fight through brutal training and punishment. They were forced to kill for the crowd's entertainment. When the games began, they could not show fear. They could not run. All they could do was fight. So, what was life truly like for these people? Behind the armor and the cheering crowds, the reality is darker than you think. This is how life truly was for a Roman gladiator. Not born, but made gladiators were not born in glory, and most of them did not choose this life at all. Many of them were slaves. They were either captured in wars, kidnapped, or sold by their families. Others were criminals who were sentenced to fight in an arena as a punishment. The Romans referred to them as damnati ad ludum, condemned to the games. But here's the surprising truth. Some of these gladiators were actually free men. They were known as auctorati, individuals who voluntarily enrolled to become gladiators. The question comes to mind, why would anyone do that? Typically, it was out of desperation. Perhaps they were heavily in debt. Perhaps they had no alternative means to provide for their family. Gladiator schools offered food, shelter, and an opportunity for rewards. For some, even the tiniest chance of fame felt better than suffering from hunger on the streets. However, once you joined the gladiator school, everything shifted quickly. You lost your freedom. You gave up your name. You turned yourself into someone's property. Every gladiator was owned by a lanista, a manager who bought, trained, and controlled them. These lanistas viewed gladiators as assets. They did not care who the man once was. The only thing they cared about was what they could become in that arena. New recruits were marked or tattooed, stamped like cattle. They were given stage names: the Thracian, the Gaul, the Beast of Carthage. These were more than just nicknames. They removed a man's identity and transformed him into a symbol, something the audience could cheer or boo without guilt. It did not matter whether he had been a farmer, a dad, or even a warrior. As he passed through the gates of the ludus, his previous life was gone. Now he was a gladiator. Now he was a fighter built for the arena. He was owned, trained, and kept alive for just one reason: to kill or be killed. Training for blood life within a gladiator school known as a ludus was entirely different from the external world. Once you entered, every part of your day was controlled. You woke up early, trained for hours, and followed strict guidelines. There was no freedom and no rest for them. Your trainer was known as a lanista, who was typically a former gladiator. He knew the suffering, the terror, and the violence that lay ahead, and he ensured that you were prepared for that. Training was more than just swinging swords. It began with the basics: foot placement, stability, and timing. You trained with wooden weapons that were twice the weight of actual ones. But why? If you could manage those, you would excel when the actual battle came. There were no easy ways. Gladiators practiced daily without exception. They went through daily exercises, sparring, and infinite repetitions. You ate when they allowed you. You slept when they told you. What about the food? Unexpectedly, it wasn't meat-focused as one might assume. The majority of gladiators consumed a diet rich in barley, beans, and grains. It was rich in carbohydrates to increase mass and help in wound recovery. They were also called hordearii, men of barley. It may seem like they were treated kindly, but it was not the case. They were nourished well, because a well-nourished gladiator survived longer in the arena and generated more income for the lanista. Training-related injuries were common. If you were injured, they fixed you up quickly. There was no compassion, no time to heal gradually. You were a financial asset. They could not afford to lose you. The punishment was harsh. Disobeying commands or displaying weakness could result in being whipped, beaten, or even confined in chains. A few gladiators attempted to flee. Hardly any of them were successful. However, if you endured the pain and completed the challenges, you were given a combat style. The Roman system included several types: the Murmillo with a large shield and helmet, the Retiarius with a net and trident, the Secutor, the Thraex, and many others. Each had special weapons, armor, and tactics. You were not simply preparing to fight, you were preparing to perform. In the Roman arena, just surviving was not sufficient. You had to put on a show. We remember gladiators as icons, warriors of ancient stories, and symbols of strength and glory. But the truth is way darker. Most of them were not heroes, they were victims. They were trapped in a brutal system and forced to kill for survival. Their life was hard, and they died at a very young age. They were forgotten by the world that cheered for them. So, the next time you hear the word gladiator, don't picture the armor. Picture a man who is tired, bleeding, and fighting for fame and survival. Like this journey into the Roman arena. Share and subscribe for more stories like that. If they were lucky, they would not have to face someone they knew. But at times, they did. And those were the toughest battles, since no one wished to kill a brother. Nonetheless, the audience did not care. The owner did not care. They just wanted to see the fight. If one of them fell, the others had to continue. But they remembered those. Certain gladiators etched names onto walls, some held silent ceremonies. When the arena took someone, the ludus mourned in its own way. In a world where everything was taken from you, your identity, your liberty, your future, companionship was one of the few things that still felt real. In the end, brotherhood was not a weakness, it was survival. The price of freedom. For many gladiators, freedom was the dream. The rudis, a basic wooden sword, was the symbol of that dream. Receiving the rudis indicated that a gladiator had achieved freedom. He was no longer a slave, no longer a property. He could leave the arena and never return. However, in reality, freedom was not so simple. Only a handful ever reached that point. The majority of gladiators died within a few years after their first battle. The fortunate ones who lived long enough to gain their freedom had to achieve it by shedding more blood than they ever imagined. Win after win. Game after game. This was all while risking their lives each time they entered the arena. And even for those who made it, the outside world wasn't always welcoming. What happens to a man after years of killing for amusement? Where does he go? Who hires a past gladiator? For many gladiators, the response was, no one. They had no money, no property, and no families left. Their fame didn't always follow them outside the walls of the ludus. That's why some decided to continue fighting even after gaining their freedom. As we said, Flamma, the renowned gladiator from Syria, was offered his freedom on 4 occasions, and 4 times he returned it. He opted for the arena rather than a life of poverty or anonymity. Some, after freedom, became trainers or personal bodyguards. A few were hired to perform mock battles at private parties. But no matter where they went, they were still viewed through the same perspective, as warriors, not men. The rudis provided them with legal liberty, but it was unable to erase the trauma. It failed to heal the wounds. It couldn't return the years they had lost or the friends they buried. And for some people, it simply didn't seem like freedom in any way. When your whole existence had revolved around violence and survival, peace could seem strange. Sometimes it's easier to return to the one place where you still feel like you matter, even if it might kill you. The death they didn't show. The crowd always saw the moment a gladiator died. They witnessed the clash of weapons, the final strike, and the body falling to the ground. They cheered, applauded, and then shifted their focus to the next match. However, what they failed to notice was everything else. They didn't see the moments after the cheering stopped, the blood mixing with the sand, and the lifeless body pulled away by slaves, motionless and quiet. They failed to notice the faint gasps of a dying man or the pain in his eyes. Death in the arena was not always instant. Some gladiators were finished off quickly with a precise blow, usually to the neck or chest. Others were not that lucky. Injured, yet alive, they were taken to the passages under the arena, where many gradually bled out in the darkness. There was no family and no friends around them, just cold stone and fading light. Maybe the renowned ones received a proper burial. Some were commemorated in verses or inscribed on tombstones by their fellow fighters. But the majority, they were thrown into mass graves, they were heaped on one another and without any identity. They were forgotten. The same crowd that previously shouted their names had now shifted focus, excited for the upcoming match. For them, gladiators were just an enjoyment and nothing else. However, modern archaeology tells a different story. Excavated skeletons reveal the harsh reality. Numerous fractures, significant scars, and bones eroded from constant fighting. Several had more than 10 healed injuries before their last one. Many of them had their skulls perfectly divided in half. Some had injuries in the pelvis or jaw. These were not glorious deaths. These were deaths of exhaustion, of terror and pain. The films portray it as glory. They adorn it with melody and slow motion. But the real end is completely different. It was quick, ugly, and silent. The death of a gladiator didn't come with applause. It came with a whisper. And after that, the crowd forgot. That's the point where the myth comes. The well-known gesture of thumbs down, it's not actually what the Romans used. Historians believe the crowd might have raised their fists, turned their thumbs sideways, or used other gestures. No matter what the gesture was, the meaning was clear. Live or die. Gladiators did not fight just other warriors. They encountered fierce creatures as well, like lions, leopards, and elephants. Sometimes they battled with full armor. At other times, they were hardly given anything. Some were linked by chains. A few had their eyes covered. Some were sent just to be killed for entertainment. And then there were the executions. Criminals were tied to stakes and ripped apart by animals. Some had no choice but to engage in lethal combat without any training. These were not even regarded as part of the main event. They were just warm-up exercises. The arena was never concerned with justice. It revolved around performance. Gladiators were the central point of the event. They were expected to battle with style, prolong the fight, and provide the audience with an entertaining display. If you defeated your opponent too quickly, there could be consequences. If you didn't fight hard enough, you could end up being killed. It was more than just a battle. It was a display, drenched in blood. Fame came at a cost. Some gladiators not only survived, they became legends. Their faces were painted on pottery, carved into statues, and scratched into walls throughout the empire. The crowd chanted their names. Women wrote love letters. Certain gladiators even had admirers. In a realm dominated by emperors and commanders, a gladiator could rise from nothing and become famous. Consider Flamma, for instance. He was a slave from Syria. He competed in 34 fights and emerged victorious in 21. In Rome, fighters were granted freedom or retirement if they showed great skill and bravery. In doing so, they were rewarded with a wooden baton known as rudius. Flamma was so popular that he was offered rudius on 4 separate occasions. But every time he rejected it. Nobody is sure exactly why. Perhaps he was devoted to his comrades in battle. Perhaps he loved the attention. Or perhaps he was aware of something that others were not. He knew that beyond the arena, he would go back to being just another forgotten man. He also received old age for a gladiator, dying at age 30 after being stabbed in the neck by a trident, while many gladiators died in their early 20s. Then there was Spartacus, the most renowned gladiator in Roman history. He was a Thracian gladiator, but he escaped his training school, initiated a large-scale slave revolt, and rocked the foundations of the Roman Republic. For a brief moment, he transformed from a warrior into a symbol of resistance. However, Rome defeated him, executed his followers, and ensured that everyone remembered what would happen to gladiators who got too powerful. Yes, fame could bring benefits. Elite gladiators received better meals, more comfortable living spaces, and lighter training routines. Some received gold, presents, or personal bodyguards. Some became the favorites of emperors. But no level of fame could erase the reality. They were a property. Even the most beloved fighters lacked control over their lives. They had no control over when or where they battled. They could not leave, and if the crowd ever turned on them, if they lost their edge, their youth, or their strength, they could be discarded just as quickly as they rose. Fame in the arena was not freedom, it was just a brighter spotlight on the same cage. Brotherhood and survival. For a gladiator, the arena was a lonely place, but inside the walls of the ludus, he was not alone. As time went on, something strange took place in these harsh training camps. In a world founded on brutality and terror, gladiators formed deep bonds. They trained together, bled together, and sometimes died together. That kind of suffering created a connection between them. These men came from all parts of the Roman Empire. Some were soldiers who had been captured, while others were thieves, slaves, or recruits. They communicated in various languages. They had different gods and different pasts. However, once in the school, none of that mattered because everyone was just trying to survive. They spent each day together, facing the same punishments, eating the same food, and receiving the same blows. And throughout the journey, they found how to rely on one another. In the arena, that trust could determine the difference between life and death. A few practiced together in pairs, helping one another in their progress. Some battled until they were bruised and breathless, then they sat together to share a bowl of barley. They would make jokes, smile, and act as if everything was not so bad. However, when fight day arrived, the laughter stopped. Gladiators were property. In the eyes of the Roman world, gladiators were not considered human beings. They were just someone's property. Each gladiator was owned by someone, a lanista, a training school, or sometimes a rich Roman. Their worth was measured in currency, not character. A powerful, experienced warrior might be worth a considerable amount. However, they could be sold, exchanged, or thrown away just like a horse or a slave. Gladiators were not allowed to select their battles. Their owners determined when, where, and who they would confront. If a sponsor or event organizer wanted your skills for a major event, your owner could rent you out for a fee. You could be sent across the empire, from dusty regional arenas to the magnificent Colosseum in Rome. It did not matter if you were prepared or not. If your owner wanted you to go, you had to go, no matter what. Off the battlefield, life was not much better. The majority of gladiators lived in locked, crowded dormitories within the ludus. They were rarely permitted to go outside. They were unable to go to markets, temples, or relatives. Everything was controlled, and there were always guards. Men with weapons who kept an eye on them day and night. And these guards were ready to punish anyone who stepped out of line. Some owners were stricter than others. Some provided good meals or more comfortable sleeping beds. However, no one perceived their gladiators as equals. Even the most renowned warriors' men with audiences shouting their names were still perceived as tools for profit. They were trained to entertain, and they were never free. Each time they entered the arena, they were reminded of one important thing, that they did not belong to themselves. They are someone else's property. The arena was a slaughterhouse. The Roman arena was built to impress and to terrify as well. Thousands of spectators, 50,000 or more, filled the arena. There were sounds of trumpets, and the nobles took their seats. Deep beneath the floor, gladiators waited in the dark. They were listening to the sounds of crowds and knew what it meant. The crowd was hungry for blood. Unlike what Hollywood portrays, not every fight ends in death. Training gladiators was costly, and owners were not ready to lose their top fighters too soon. However, it's important to clarify. Death was always on the table. A wounded man could be finished if the crowd desired it. The final decision was given by the editor, the sponsor of the event. He could spare a gladiator or could give a thumbs down to seal his fate.